It's been a tough time, hasn't it, for everyone, firms and individuals. The firms have had to reassess overheads and budgets and so forth. And as a result, the investment in longer term industry improvement has certainly, and training has certainly come under the microscope in the last year. And we're seeing now the effects on the bottom line of clients and contractors throughout the industry. GIRI is committed to the industry raising its game through the avoidance of error and looking at all the benefits that brings. So just this diagram, I'm sure you've all seen it before, but just to re-emphasize, we did this survey back in 2015 and 2016. 21% of what we're looking at of GDP is spent on putting things right. And we also looked at the root causes of error. And here's the top 10 list, which features design quite a lot, as you know. And so we, in response to that, produced our design guide, which is available on the website. But GIRI have also introduced training to look at leadership and interface management and supervisory skills. So we've reacted properly to the information that came out of the surveys that we did. Originally, we secured funding to carry out that research, and it showed what we needed to do. So we set up GIRI with these themes: creating a culture and working environment to get things right, changing attitudes and harnessing leadership responsibility, engaging all the stakeholders involved in a construction project, right from inception through operation to completion, and knowledge sharing. This very important aspect about error reduction and getting processes and systems which lead to that is reliant on sharing knowledge. And of course, the improving skills across the sector, we've got our training courses, of which Nick is a lead. And I think it's also important to look at some of the benefits of an error avoidance approach, because we talk about productivity, and that's a given almost, but there are other direct benefits, and we need to recognize. I mean, we save money. There are many hidden costs of error, which we picked up in our earlier research. Less wastage generated, so you have an improved carbon footprint. There's reduced rework, and this has safety implications. An Australian study showed that something like 37% of accidents occurred during rework. And we avoid progress delays, so we get greater delivery certainty. You know, progress, it's always a very important aspect of the promises that we make as an industry. And of course, we get better quality outcomes. You're all familiar with that rush of clearing out the debris of mistakes as the bow wave approaches the end of a project. Well, if we can avoid error in the first place, we won't get that bow wave, and we'll get enhanced quality reputation. And that will reinforce our corporate messages and individual messages of taking pride in what we do. So our strategic aim is to improve construction productivity and quality and reduce costs and waste by eliminating error. Just for those of you who are members, a reminder, please save the date for Thursday, 1st of July, when we're going to have our first face-to-face meeting post-COVID at the Institution of Civil Engineers, 9:30 on Thursday, 1st of July. So please come along. Yeah. We need to have the right culture throughout the industry. We've got to empower people to act in ways which reduce errors. And there are major benefits of that. We need to change the way we work and the way we behave. And if we do that, we'll have a better industry they'll be more cost effective and have a better reputation. So let's leave it there now and carry on with Nick. Thanks, Nick.
Brilliant, thank you. Great, hello. Well, I can see some of you, but if the rest of you could please put your cameras on if you possibly can and give me a big double-handed wave, make me feel like I'm dealing with human beings. That's always a treat. Great. So as Cliff said, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on repurposing existing buildings. Now, if I start using the wrong words and say renovation, please pick me up on that. I do get it wrong, but we're thinking about repurposing existing buildings, and we're specifically thinking about buildings, so we're not going to cover bridges, tunnels, things like that today. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to use this whiteboard that I will share. Here we go, we're looking at the whiteboard. And what we're going to do today is try and answer a number of questions. And we're going to start off where we'll just share our experience so we know what expertise we've got in the room, because I'm conscious we've got a lot of it. We're then going to say, why does this matter? So we'll have a little look at what the situation is at the moment and why is repurposing our current building stock such a big issue. We'll then move on to the next question, which is what do we do now within the Get It Right initiative? So how do we try to get it right at the moment on what we call our normal projects? Then we're going to say, well, how are projects to repurpose existing buildings different? And once we've identified the difference, we'll then ask the next question of going, okay, so what? What are the new risks? And that'll take us to the final so what, which is, therefore, how can we respond? What should we do about it? So that is the journey we're going to go on in the next sort of hour and a quarter. So this is the mural board that I'm in at the moment. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you all into this whiteboard. Many of you will have used this before, but it's basically a collaborative space. So you can all stick your own post-it notes on here and we can capture and share information really quickly. So when I invite you into the board, what will happen is I'll give you a link and you will turn up as a little creature in this board. Once you're in the board, you can navigate around it. Now, this box down at the bottom right-hand corner is a bit like any CAD screen, and you can zoom in and out. You can use the slider to zoom in and out, and there'll be a little box showing you what you're looking at. You can also click on it, click on the board, and move to where you want to be. So you want to come in to this middle bit, and I can grab you and bring you in. If you've got a scrolly mouse, you can also scroll in using your mouse. So once you're in it, what I'd like you to do, please, is use a sticky note and answer these couple of questions. First thing, stick your name on a sticky note. So you can do that by coming up here to this logo that looks like a sticky note, grab one, drag it onto the board, and then put your name on it. So I'm going to put Nick. The next question I'd like you to answer is please just put the name of any project, either a project you've worked on or that you know of, to repurpose an existing building. So we just want to know what your awareness is at the moment. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to put Sheffield University Art Space. So that's the one I'm going to put as my one. And the next thing I want you to do, please, is import a picture of that project. Now, this is really easy to do. So if you look at, there's a little icon like a mountain. Look over to the left, find that icon, mountain icon, and just type in the name of your project. And if it appears on the internet, it will appear here. So Sheffield Art Space. There we go. And I'm going to pick an image. Let's go for that one. It's a bit big, so I'm going to shrink it down. There we go. So I've stuck in my name, the project I am aware of, and I'm then going to link them with some arrows. So I'll go to these shapes and connectors, grab some arrows and stick them on. Oh, that's sort of working vaguely. There we go. I'll just do another one. Oh. So I will now invite you all into this mural board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click share up here and I'll get a visitor link, copy that link, and now I'm going to put that in the chat box. So here's the chat box. So if you can please click on the chat box in WebEx and you should appear as a little animal in this board. I can see someone's moving around, so I think that's Cliff. There we go. I can see a few of you turning up. And what I'll do is I will give you 4 minutes to put your name and your project on that board, and then we'll see what projects people have come up with. Please just unmute and shout out if you have any questions or if the tech isn't working for you. Okay, so if anyone's having problems, give me a shout and I might be able to help you with.
I have managed to fail in this task.
What's happened? What happened when you clicked the link?
I've got a big white screen now, but with real people in the top right-hand corner. So.
Okay, well that sounds promising. Let me summon. I'm going to click summon just to make sure that everyone is looking at the right area. There we go. So. So is that link working for you now, John?
No.
What you might want to do is if you open a browser window and then cut and paste the link in, sometimes that might make it work.
Right.
But if not, don't worry, it won't undermine your participation at all.
Or basic incompetence, I think it normally does.
As expected, I can't get a picture to work out of the space with the mountain on it.
So if you
click on that.
Yeah, and what happens when you click on that?
I double click on it and get a post-it.
Ah, so just single click on it. Single click on. Oh no, you have to go over to the left of the screen. So that's just an image of the.
Ah, right. I've got you now. Yeah.
Yeah. So go over to the left of the screen, click on that mountain, and then a box comes up that you can type in.
Can't find that. Still not finding that. Here we go.
Got some pretty impressive, flashy looking structures appearing here. I've got a few seconds left for you to jot down any repurposing projects you either have worked on or aware of, and then we'll see what experiences people have got from these projects.
No, I've just got a grey box. It won't drag the picture.
Okay, no worry. Well, if it's got the words, then we know what it is. So let's have a look at these experiences then, and these projects that have been highlighted. So I'll just share my screen as well. So I suggest you probably close down or minimize your mural window, and then you can we'll all be looking at the same thing. So let's hear from a few people. So maybe can I come to you, Will? Is that a project you've worked on, 80 New Bond Street, or is it just one you're aware of?
Yeah, so that's one that I'm working on at the moment,
Yeah.
which is obviously on the corner of New Bond Street and Oxford Street, hence the name. And it is, I mean, at the moment it is retail with offices above, but there's going to be a slight switch in the kind of proportions of that, and it also used to be residential at the top, and that's being converted to offices with a few more stories added on top. But it is kind of reusing 75% of the existing frame, and by the time it's been built, that will make up 50% of the new structure.
Right. Okay. So about 50% original structure, 50% new structure. Great. Okay. Thank you. Let's have a hear from someone else who's either working on or worked on. What about 2 Vicar Lane, Leeds? Ruth, this is your project, is it?
It was a project that I was involved with a few years ago that had a substantial number of problems. So it was kind of the one that I thought of for this. So it used to be a bank. And I think the project was to turn the bottom into commercial space and then apartments in the top floors.
Brilliant. And you said there were considerable problems. What do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think there was some quite serious health and safety issues. I think one of the people in charge, it turned out, had been lying about his qualifications, and they had things like scaffolding where there was a ladder that led all the way to the ground that was just left like that overnight, so any member of the public could climb onto the scaffolding. And I even heard that there was an explosion because they'd done something wrong with the gas. I mean, like a very minor thing, but it took the electricity out.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and eventually they had to have the site closed down.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. What about maybe Neil? Are you at this St Helens Place project? Is that one you can mention or talk about your experience?
Can do, Nick. Vast majority of the projects we do, in fact, I can't think of one that's actually repurposed, so I've gone as close as I can. This was I believe, an old government building that's been repurposed for commercial use. It's just down from Leadenhall Street in London. And it's basically, we are doing a lot of adaptations to the structure, including extra floors to provide commercial space. Very interesting. We've got Molas downstairs in the basement working with our ground workers to actually look at, do a watching brief to look for any archaeological finds. And so far we found about 4 or 5 skeletons.
Oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, maybe not the construction issues we naturally think about when repurposing existing buildings, but yeah, turning it.
Not really. But the change in the structure is immensely problematic to allow it. How can I say? It's an efficient floor space for the developer to use a square format rather than a number of infills are required.
Right. Interesting. Really interesting. There we go. Approve you, John. I'm not quite sure what I'm approving, but I'll trust you doing something sensible. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I can see that there is a vast amount of experience. I would love to spend the next hour just hearing what all of you said about the pictures, but that's not what we're going to do now. So what we're going to do is move on to that second question, which is, why does this matter? Why are we talking about this today? Well, let's have a look at some of the sort of factors that are at play here. So this first image, this is just an extract from a document by the UK Green Building Council. And the bit that really caught my eye was newly constructed buildings are more energy efficient, but 80% of the buildings in 2050 have already been built. So no matter what we want or what we'd like, the vast majority of the buildings that we're going to have for our lifetimes have already been built. So that's a fact. Let's have a look at some other factors. The government has committed to building 300,000 new homes a year. Okay, so that's a big number. So it would be reasonable to think that some of those homes probably aren't going to be new build. I'd imagine a lot of those are going to be within repurposed buildings that already exist in some way or another. And then we've got this other factor. I mean, this is just an extract from Norman Foster, but talking about post-COVID offices being converted into housing. So we know that we are having a massive and sudden shift in how we use our building stock. I don't know where you all live in the centre of Sheffield, where I am at the moment, most of the big department stores are shutting, and we have an urgent need for more housing. I mean, you don't take a genius to put those two together. We then got changes to the planning regulations, and basically there is now default permission to convert existing buildings into residential. So where previously the planning laws would determine what a building could be used for, that's recently changed in that if you want to make it residential, you can. And then another factor, we're talking about carbon emissions. So new legislation, new law saying that we must cut our carbon emissions by 78% by 2035. And then coupled to that, this is just a report by Derwent London, so a big developer. And what they state is they can typically achieve a 70% reduction in embodied carbon when they repurpose existing buildings rather than build new. So it's interesting that those numbers are so close. So we can see that there's a massive carbon incentive while we have to reuse or repurpose the existing buildings we've got. And you may be aware of the campaign from the Architects Journal, the Retro First, where they say all architects should by default reuse or repurpose existing buildings, not build new. And there may be changes to the tax policy that make it cheaper to do that. So it seems like there is quite a lot of momentum pushing in the direction of repurposing our existing infrastructure rather than just building new. So what I'd like to do now, and hopefully I think Helena, you've got these teed up, is just run a couple of polls to see what your experiences are. So Helena, could you please share the first poll in the chat box? There we go. Now there's a link in the chat box on WebEx to a poll. So please click on that poll. And the first question is, over the last 10 years, what percentage of your work has involved at least some reuse of existing buildings, foundations or structures? It's very rough, but please just give a punt. Give you 30 seconds to get some answers. Give you a few more seconds. We've had 10 responses so far. Okay, so I'll share those results, which, there we go, I'm sharing that screen. So interestingly, we can see that over the last 10 years, 36% have said 0 to 10%. We've got a few 20 to 30, and then right up at the other end, 70 to 80. So interestingly, what we can see is that we've had a lot of people saying their projects are primarily new build, and then a few people have had a few. So actually it feels like over the last 10 years, from the people on the call, there's not been that much repurposing of existing buildings. So I'll stop sharing, and Helena, could you put the second question up, please? I don't know, do you need to share that link again, or is it the same link, Helena?
Yeah, I think that should be the same link.
Okay, great. So if you can answer that second question. So what do you anticipate over the next 10 years? Wow. Okay, so let's have a look at those results. So it looks like we've got a lot of people up in the 60 to 70%, and then about the same number in the 20 to 30%. We've got nobody saying none. So there's going to be a massive leap, it feels like, in terms of what the construction industry is doing, shifting from new builds being normal, repurposing being a novelty, to almost the opposite. Repurposing will be normal, new build will become the novelty. So that's really interesting for us in the Get It Right initiative, because we are focused on preventing error and improving productivity, getting construction right. So there's a question there, isn't there? Are we focusing on how to get construction right in the context of new build? So let's have a look at what we do now and what some of our assumptions are. So here's our assumption of how a project works. You have a sort of flow through a project life cycle, probably starts with a client, maybe then goes to some planners, an architect, consultant probably does some design, contractor comes along, and then operatives will build the thing. We've got that sort of waterfall, cascade mental model of how a project often works. And this is completely reflected in the REBA plan of works. You start off with strategic definition, the idea, the brief, concept design, you develop the design, then you build it, and then you use it. And that is what all of our processes do. And you might, anyone who was on the previous forum that looked at processes, we have a whole host of different processes that different organizations use. So things that principal contractors do, they have inspections, DMIs, a bunch of processes for managing how we do this work. And we had a look at how each of those different elements, subcontractors, architects, quality professionals, how they had processes that helped our industry work. And what the Get It Right initiative research found was that this stuff has some holes in it, primarily because our behaviours as an industry don't work as well as they could. And therefore, the Get It Right initiative focuses on how do we get behaviour change? How do we make sure that people are thinking properly, building it in their brain? How do we make sure people are empowered to pause before they make an error? We look at communication. Are we using closed loop communication? And we look at our processes and say, well, actually, how can we prevent this optimism bias creeping in? How can we stop people just assuming things will be okay and then making the same old mistakes? So that's what we do at the moment. And that's where GIRI spends its effort, is improving the way that the industry functions. But this is where we need to come on to our next question, which is, how is repurposing different to what we think of as normal construction or new build construction? And what I'd like to do, please, is to put you into breakout groups. So we'll put you randomly assigned into 5 different breakout groups. And when you come into the mural board, I'll just share it with you, share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. Here we go. Down at this bottom right-hand corner of the mural board, there are some boxes, and there's one for each of the 5 breakout groups. And I will summon you as well so that your mural board is pointing at the right place. When you're in your breakout groups for 10 minutes, what I'd like you to do is try and answer this question. How are projects to repurpose buildings different to what we call a normal project? And you might want to use these as prompts. So question 1, what are the major program differences? Do you have to do things in a different order? Question 2, what are the major implications of undertaking work to repurpose buildings for the different parties in the construction supply chain? Is it exactly the same for a client, but just different for a designer, or is it more complicated than that? So what are the differences for particular people? And then any other observations. So what I'd like you to do, please, is in your breakout groups, find the right place on the board. And when you've had a discussion, just stick some sticky notes in there. And if you can pick one person from your breakout group who can then provide a 30-second summary of your discussions, and then we'll see what you all come up with. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And Helena, could you please open the breakout groups? And please just talk in your groups and then use the mural boards. You might only want one of you to scribe, and just stick some sticky notes in there to capture what you're thinking. Hello, welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all. So let's have a look. I can see lots of post-it notes are appearing on the board, so that was really good. Let's have a look at group 1. I don't know who was in group 1, but have you got a nominated person who can talk about what you discussed? Let's hear from group 1, and I'll share the screen.
I don't think we nominated someone, but I'm happy to give an overview.
Brilliant, thanks, Ruth.
Sure. So we spent most of the time looking at question 1 because I think we had this question about if you have a building that you can repurpose and it's very close at the moment to how like if you can just use what's there for the eventual building, then it's a much simpler process. Although then if you have like some of my past projects have involved putting in basements to central London residential properties, which, as you can imagine, having a building there already makes it a lot harder. So it's a spectrum. Sometimes the early stages can be much quicker, and sometimes they can take a lot longer.
Interesting. Okay, so the assumption that this early stage of the project takes this amount of time, this amount of money, can be completely inaccurate with a. Okay, interesting. Thanks. Anything else you want to sort of share from what you discussed?
And then I think we discussed that in the later stages, when the project is on site, you then get more queries from contractors and more unexpected delays can crop up. So you're probably looking at delays to the program with a repurposing project.
Interesting. So it sounds like the concept of design doesn't sit where it traditionally sits. Some of it is earlier on in terms of choosing what you're going to do, and then it's also being dragged into the construction phase. So completely changing the model of how a designer sits in that supply chain or project lifecycle. Really interesting. Thank you. Anyone else from Group 1 want to add anything or supplement or comment on what Ruth has explained?
Hi, Samir here. Yeah, I would just add a lot more maybe feasibility work. I think the feasibility stage maybe takes a bit longer from an engineering background, because in a way you can't really get to a brief until you've got to do some structural feasibility engineering works to actually tell your client or the architect what is achievable with a building. So maybe program feasibility is a bit, as Ruth has mentioned, is heavier upfront.
Interesting. That sounds like that could be challenging in terms of unlocking finance to do that work, because that sounds to me like it's before one of the gateways at which a client says, yes, we are willing to commit money to this project. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Is that the case? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a different timing to the investment decision. Certainly, if you've quite often got to go through the process of looking at, well, how much would it cost to repurpose compared to knocking down and starting again, and that debate's got to be had, and the client has got to, if they're 100% committed to repurposing from the outset, it's a different story. But if they're looking at still optioneering on the possibilities, then that takes longer.
So so it sounds like to consider optioneering to incorporate repurposing the building cost more before you make the decision as to how much money to spend.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the idea is that you were in that optioneering. You're saying one of the attractions of repurposing is it's cheaper than new build, and that's what clients are told. But any contractor will tell you that's not right. He'd rather build it new. So it varies. But it's that process got to be gone through.
I would also chip in, goes back to one of the earlier points about if you're thinking about the expense of doing it. The fact that actually when we redid this house, because it's a repurposed 60s house, we ended up paying that on everything. Whereas actually, if we'd dropped the whole thing and rebuilt it, we wouldn't have paid that. And basically, we probably could have done it slightly cheaper by just dropping the whole house and starting it again.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we liked it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Brilliant. Thank you. Let's go to Group 2. So I'll share the screen, and if someone from Group 2 could explain what you were thinking of, please.
I think I got the vote on this one. I'd just like to say publicly, thank you very much, Emma Jane Forrest, who's joined us on the phone and was mute throughout, but added post-its, and so thanks very much, Emma. So one of the thoughts we had about this whole lead-in time on a repurposing, and it probably applies as much to refurbishment, is that on new build you have quite a lot of time in the ground sorting out the structure and the below ground structure and what have you, and it definitely gives you longer to sort out all the difficult interfaces that occur in the design within the building itself. There's a lot more complications there. With a repurposing, you don't get that time in the ground. So your designers are nose up to producing information, fully coordinated information for the builder a lot earlier in the process. So we have to forcibly, in a program for a repurposed building, give ourselves more lead-in time than would be probably the case if we were going new build. So that's one point. And then in order to do the design and to come up with a design that's reasonably going to flow, you've got to have done a lot of surveys to make sure what you're proposing to do is possible within the confines of the existing building, and you're not going to uncover loads of stuff that's going to make life difficult, particularly asbestos and things like that, which can cause delays. So this interfaces with other existing buildings and how the existing structure is. If you want to avoid errors in your design and in the construction, you've got to do a lot more surveying. So both the design and the surveying has got to take place before you really push the button for construction, and that lead-in time is a lot longer in our view.
And something that you said there, Cliff, just got me thinking. Have we got any quantity surveyors on the call today? I don't know if anyone is a quantity surveyor. And something else I don't know, does Spons or any of those books, do they have estimates for repurposing work? I don't know if that's even a thing. Because I know when you normally plan a project, that would be the first port of call.
In Spons, you'll have quantities and measured quantities of doing a particular task, and some of those tasks will be tasks that you need to do during a repurposing operation. I don't remember there being a specific chapter in Spons that dealt with refurbishment as such.
I'm just thinking that in terms of that initial ballpark estimate, if you were, said, oh, we need a new build hospital, you do a top-down approach and go, oh, well, we know that's about X thousand per square metre. But it sounds like we're maybe a lot more in the dark when it comes to our projects to repurpose existing infrastructure. We don't have that baseline sort of assumption or baseline standard of what it's going to cost. Really interesting. Thank you. Anyone else from group 2 want to add anything to what Cliff was saying, or any questions maybe to what Cliff was saying? Right, well, let's skip on then to group 3. Who's going to talk from group 3, please? Share the screen as well.
I can jump in and say a few words, and then someone else from my group can join in. I think we covered a lot of the same things that have already been mentioned. I think having more unforeseen issues, and yes, needing to do lots more surveys, but then also just having to accept that there always will be some risk, because without taking out everything in the structure, if you're kind of removing walls and things, you won't know about things until much later down the line. So you do have to build in some flexibility and contingency into your designs, and also just having different constraints, I guess. So we're discussing how perhaps you might be constrained by access to the site, and your build sequence might be influenced by what's already there. So you have different drivers. And then I think we also discussed, yes, just the number of interfaces, and your details and things are kind of forced in a lot of cases because you have to work with what is there. So you kind of, yes, there might be a greater number of interfaces and details because you're working with that existing structure. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in from my group as well.
Thanks, Will. That's anyone else jump in, but there's a couple of things that you said there that I thought were particularly interesting. And you mentioned the build sequence. And of course, our normal start at the bottom and work up assumption presumably goes completely out of the window when you're in a repurposing type situation. So I don't know what does that, so someone who's got a contracting background, I don't know, what does that mean in terms of the project if your approach to the construction program is completely different? I mean, are there implications that we maybe aren't aware of completely chucking out that normal construction sequence?
Well, for instance, on my project that I mentioned earlier, 80 New Bond Street, we're looking at, you know, whether the crane can be sat on top of the roof of the existing structure, or whether we have to use kind of, you know, mobile different types of cranes, and that would completely change the program. So that would have a big implication. And things like access to get in and do site investigations and things like that, those can need to be delayed because, you know, they can't happen until a lot of things have been stripped out and you have the required kind of room to be able to do those.
And
Yeah.
the other aspect is of course is that you may be removing structural elements of the structure that you then have to ensure you've replaced prior to removing. It doesn't do to have your ceiling or your roof meet your ground floor after working on the building for 2 days. So
yeah, that's true. And also you can start at roof level, unfortunately, and sort of make the building drier and to work in, because the roof's already there, or you may need you need to refurbish the roof maybe. But in new build, you don't get your roof till much later in the scheme of things, so you can get yourself a more weatherproof thing, which gives you a certain amount more certainty of program than you would normally have.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually there's a few times things have cropped up where it could be a massive advantage. You know, you're possibly working inside a building shell that's already watertight. You might have, you know, half the building already built. So it might be that by being more flexible in the way we do things, there can be huge advantages by the sounds of it. So something pretty interesting there. Anyone else, any comments on what you heard from Will and from Group 3? Or should we hear from Group 4? Let's go on to Group 4. So John, I know you're nominated for this one. So let's hear from you if we can on what we discussed. Oh, I think John might have. I think John's just left. Well, what we discussed in our group was basically the need to move around the where design sits in the program, in the project life cycle. So sometimes you might need decisions taken during construction rather than upfront, and that could, when you're doing construction, it might even influence what you're doing in the brief. And what else do we identify? Well, we did identify that actually, if you're reusing foundations, then conceivably this might reduce risk because you know the foundations are there. So there might be situations where reusing the structure reduces ground risk that is normally a big headache in the project program. So those were ours. And what we'll do is let's hear then, I think we've got Group 5 left as well. Group 5, you've got loads of post-its. So can I hear from someone in Group 5, please? What did you discuss? Share my screen again. There we go.
I'll step up. Okay. So a lot of it's already been talked about. I think number one on the hit list for us was definitely about investigation works. A lot more time needs to be spent in looking at the existing structure and understanding that what's there. That ties into the ergonomics of the change in use. That will obviously unlock your structure. That needs to be well considered. You've then got to tie in your structural engineer's time to look at temporary works as well. All this time means that I think the cash flow profile may be more at the front end. Obviously, that has a fairly sizable impact on designers' fees to understand that risk. So one of the big issues that we have talked about is the risk issue. So risk generally in construction is that time and cost impact. And there's a lot more of a much higher risk profile when it comes to repurposing or refurbishing buildings into that element. I'm just trying to read this. My eyes are not as good as they used to
Is
be.
it this one?
If you could make it bigger, Nick, that would be great.
How's that? Is that better?
So understanding.
That's two.
Yeah, I think generally.
That's the second question.
Oh, do you want to go back to the? There we go.
Yeah. What else do we have? Yeah. So time consuming. So you were talking there about foundations. It may be less time spent. Potentially not, because actually your structural engineer, say we're doing extra parts to the building, you may be putting new foundations in, or a lot of our projects, our developers look to add existing floors. That has a huge implication to the structure and potentially beefing up, as you say, underpinning the basement. Then you get huge logistical issues, obviously, with the build as well. Generally, I think it's the risk profile is the big one, based on huge amount of considerations, is knowing the building and understanding the ergonomics of the building, which have implications for builders' work penetrations, and the makeup of the internal walls, which can take a lot of time as well to understand. Those are my thoughts.
Great. Okay, thank you. Anyone else from Group 5 want to add anything, or any comments? So what was mentioned there again was this idea of risk and how the risk is managed, how the risk is apportioned, where the risk sits. I don't know, does anyone want to add anything to that? Because I know this is a theme that's come up, but how does the risk profile differ, or how could it be managed? Anyone, any thoughts on that for a repurposing project?
I think there's got to be a very open and honest discussions that are had, and that lends itself, if you look back into the 90s, the Latham report, apportioning risk to those who are best placed to deal with that risk. And at the moment, it feels like there's a lot of cascade of risk down into the contractor's situation, which I don't think is always right. So collaboration is a huge part of this as well. It's making sure that the team works.
You got to mitigate the risk. You need more time up front. That's the big thing, isn't it? Whoever's taking that risk needs the opportunity to do the investigations and surveys to mitigate it.
Okay, really interesting.
Sorry, Nick, I couldn't agree more, because more often than not, the tender period is very, very slim, and that gives us not enough time to really understand. We changed our business profile so that we now have design management within our business, and they do their best work at tender when they're actually looking at the structure and understanding that, and then able to go back with USP solutions to the client to say, but there's never enough time in actually how you can deal with that and, actually provide value to the client.
Yeah, I think the contracting industry taking on design and build refurbishment is always a little bit risky.
Interesting. Okay. Go ahead. Okay, well that leads on really well to this fifth part of the questions we're going to, and that is, what are the new risks? So we've had a look at what the differences are between a new build and a repurposing project, but we want to sort of focus in on what are the new risks. Well, the GIRI research identified what the common root causes of error are on traditional construction projects. So I will share my screen, and what I'll also do is I will summon you all in Mural. So that means that you're all looking at the same thing on Mural as I am. There we go, you're all zoomed in on the same bit, and I'll share my screen. Now, these are the top 10 list of the root causes of error on regular construction projects. And in at number 1, it's inadequate planning. Second root cause of error in terms of impact on cost is late design changes. Then we've got poorly communicated design information, poor culture in relation to quality, poorly coordinated and incorrect design information. So those are the top 5. Then we've got inadequate attention paid to design, paid in the design to construction. So basically buildability, excessive time and commercial pressures, poor interface management, ineffective communication between team members, and then inadequate supervisory skills. Now, what I'm going to do is, if you can go into Mural now, so just click on that on the screen where you can see Mural. I'll make sure you're all looking at me, and I am going to do a thing called a voting session, and the question is root causes. So each of you has got 5 votes, and what I'd like you to do, please, is click on those 10 post-it notes there and allocate those 5 votes to the root causes of error that you think are most relevant in a repurposing project. So if you think one of them is absolutely the only thing that matters, you can give all 5 of your votes to that one thing, or you can share them out how you want. But please click on those to allocate your votes between those 10 root causes. We'll just see what picture we paint. So I can see some of you have finished voting. I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so. Share my screen. There we go. So a few of you have got some votes left. Okay, well, I'm going to end that session now, and let's see what results we get. End that voting session, end the session. Okay, so these are the results. So we've got excessive time and commercial pressures, got 10 votes. So time and cost, design changes 9, inadequate planning 8, and then we've got 6 for not paying attention to constructability and poor and incorrect design information. So and then we've got a few for the others. So let's see what that looks like. Here we go. Okay, so we can see these as a picture. So time and cost pressures jumps up to the top. Normally that's ranked as 7th of our top root causes of error, but we've identified that this is now the top. Then we've got late design changes and inadequate planning. So it's interesting that what we think are the root causes of error seem to have jumped around a bit. So what I'd like to do now, we've reflected on the normal root causes of error. But what I'd like to do is ask you a second question, and that is, are there any other underlying root causes of things going wrong on a project to repurpose an existing building? And what I'd like you to do is just think quietly for yourself, and I'll give you 1 minute to think, and then I'm going to ask you, please, just to type your answers into the chat box here on WebEx. So I'll start a timer, 1 minute to think. Is there anything else that is a common root cause of errors? And then chuck it in the chat box, and we'll see what everyone comes up with. Okay, great. So let's have a look at this chat box and see what we've got. So please type your answer into the chat box now. We'll see what you all come up with. So let's hear from some of these, so have a look at some of these answers. So Neil, you've talked about logistical constraints. Can you explain what that means, what that feels like?
Yeah, so it's basically a lack of consideration on the sequencing and logistics. So the teams fail to consider, there's actually probably this is a symptom of failing to plan and consider to get kit in the right places, which then can't be done, and therefore they have to rethink the sequence or rethink the works, leading to rework on site.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Anyone else any thoughts on that or agree with that as a root cause? Let's what else have we got? We've got so Mark, you mentioned understanding the existing structure. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes. Obviously, if you don't understand what the existing structure is, how it's being built, and any sort of defects that might typically run along with those methods of construction, if you don't understand them fully at the early design stage, if you do loads and loads of work on repurposing the structure and then find out that actually there's something that we should have addressed early on in the process, you're then starting to think, well, actually, we've now got to unpick everything that we've done for the past however many months, and then you're starting the cycle all over again. So really trying to understand what the structure is, how it's been built, and likely defects at the start can just really help the whole process. Interesting.
Okay, and is that linked to assumptions? So sort of basing all your work on assumptions that then turn out to be incorrect. Is that the type of thing?
Yeah, and not sort of getting accurate surveys and sort of specialist investigations to confirm those assumptions are correct.
Interesting. Great. And then, and Will, you mentioned less standardization on a repurposing project, which may require greater technical skills. Do you want to expand on that? What's your experience of that, or what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy on new build projects to fall back on typical details and things like that. And when you get existing structures, you can often find some initial designs that have drawn some very odd kind of details, maybe because they're working around the existing structures that is there, and you actually need quite a good technical knowledge of why some of the standard things are the way they are, to really understand how you can adapt them to fit an existing structure. So yeah, I think you definitely end up that you need more technical understanding of why typical details are the way that they standardly are.
Okay, great. So it's much more first principles in a way that you've got to solve the problems. Sounds quite exciting, if anything, doesn't it? It sounds much more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I agree.
And then we've got, so Ruth and Samir, both of you talked about lack of experience. So Ruth, do you want to comment on that? Is that something you are aware of or experienced?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the project that I talked about at the beginning, I think it was quite clear that the site manager just didn't really know what he was doing, and it led to him making some decisions which then were hugely the wrong decision, and the errors just kind of compounded, and it all came down to a lack of experience in the end.
Interesting. And Samir, was that similar to your thoughts?
No, slightly different actually. I think coming up from a design point of view, I've worked on a bit of refurbishment, admittedly a few years ago, and I'm still quite early in my career. And I think my experience is based on the fact that when I was working on these projects as a graduate engineer, there was always someone a lot more experienced who is familiar with some of the existing buildings there. From a graduate, as competent as you may be, even or chartered engineer, you have got all the skills. If you do not have experience to know how a building 50, 60 years ago was built, what was good practice beyond the codes, you can read out the code and make an understanding. I think you still need to have people in the design team who may be familiar with how these buildings used to be built. What are things which are beyond the code, and good practice documents which would have been incorporated, which isn't obvious to someone who's quite early in their career or doesn't know the history. So in a way, I'm saying you do kind of need experienced engineers who are maybe later in their career to help part of that, who can say, well, actually, we used to do it like this, or
Wow.
actually that looks a bit unexpected. I don't know why they would do that, because CP whatever code recommends this. There's a couple of things I've come across, but again, I've not had a lot of experience. But I'm just saying that I was grateful to have some senior experience on some of the refurbishment projects I've worked.
Really interesting. Does anyone else want to sort of comment on what Samir was just describing there? So the thing that I thought was really interesting is, oh, go for it, Cliff. Oh, are you muted?
Neil.
I think.
I was going to say, sorry, go on, Cliff. Go on.
I was just going to say that those of us who are a little longer in the tooth will very much appreciate the idea that we can still add value.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, not ready to be put out to pasture just yet, then, Cliff. Yeah.
I think to be honest with you, the industry has lost a lot of experience and knowledge over the last 25 years. We've been through a fair few recessions, and in each recession, we tend to lose a few more experienced people. As much as there are some great young guns coming into the industry, there is still a massive need to have that experience and knowledge embedded with the industry to drive it forward.
So it's really interesting. There's sort of three or a couple of things that I think have jumped out from this conversation just now. One is comparing what Samir was describing and what Will was describing, how you need that technical ability to work from first principles and work with what is there, but also that historical perspective to actually understand what is there. And it sounds like you need both of those. And the so what that it seems like it falls out of that is you can't just pick up your team that you used for your latest concrete high rise. You probably need a different team going, we need someone who's a real technical expert who doesn't just rely on the code. And we need someone who's got experience, who's got history, technical expertise. Let's put these together into a bespoke team that can then tackle this challenge. So really, really interesting the way those different strands seem to have come together here. I've completely lost where we're going now because I was enjoying that conversation so much. So hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at the chat box and picked out the comments from each other. Has anyone got anything they spotted in the chat box that they think is worth just bringing up? Anything that we haven't mentioned so far?
I was interested in the bit about less standardisation, but I was actually thinking of it from a slightly different perspective, in that you might find that you have to use a lot of bespoke products on a refurbishment rather than some of the sort of standard materials that you might be used to using. So that's going to have a custom and also sort of an additional sort of design element. You know, if you've got compromised floor to ceiling heights or something like that, you know, you're not going to necessarily be able to put in the most efficient ductwork design or whatever. It's going to have to be something a little bit different to suit the existing structure.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, and that we talked. So you've got those specialist sort of product, specialist skills. You've got the design skills, and then presumably that also trickles through to the contractors, the operatives who are doing the work. So it's, yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you. Okay, well, this leads us on to the final question, which is the so what question. You know, what are our priorities? So if we are, you know, we're focused on preventing error, what should be our priorities to prevent problems and prevent errors on projects to repurpose existing buildings? Now, we've only got a few minutes left. So what I suggest is we do the same again. I give you 1 minute to think quietly for yourself and then type in the chat box, what would be your one priority or your one recommendation that you could make to industry to prevent errors on projects to repurpose existing buildings? So just think of one, and each of you please type one into the chat box, and I'll start the timer going and give you a minute of thinking time before you need to type anything. Okay, that little ping pong, I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the 1 minute up. So if you can please type in the chat box, what would be your one so what recommendation for industry? What should we do? So let's hear from people on some of these answers. Okay, we've got oh, John, welcome back. Let's hear from Neil first. We've got greater uptake of BIM by client to allow visualization and collaboration. What can you expand on that, Neil?
So BIM is obviously a system that allows you to provide you that 3D opportunity to look at the project and getting to the detail as to the connections, etc. It also, I think, forces you to go into the survey apparatus in a lot more detail to provide highly detailed and accurate surveys that then provide that positivity through the use of BIM. BIM obviously is a collaborative tool which also helps bind together. So I think with that one stone, you may kill 2 or 3 birds.
Interesting. So obviously BIM is a major issue for the whole of the industry at the moment, and there's a big push for BIM. Anyone think slightly differently to Neil? Anyone think that BIM might not be the key, or any other perceptions?
Yes, I don't think. Sorry, I don't think everyone understands what BIM actually is. For me, the important point is the I. It's information. A lot think it's 3D Revits and AutoCADs and all this sort of stuff, but there's a lot more information that can actually be put in there that's not there. Risk, sustainability, and things like that. When you start, I'm with the National Digital Twins project, and a twin should replicate reality, but without risk and without sustainability, that which is the digital part isn't replicating what we have in the reality. There's a bit of work there to be done.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And I think that's the key, is that it's only useful if it's right.
Indeed.
Yeah, very interesting. Samir, you've said looking at the design teams to undertake appropriate surveys, investigations. Do you want to expand on that? I think a few people have said something similar, but maybe Samir, you can explain why you've put that.
Yes, of course. I think it's probably quite a recurring theme that once a client has got something in mind, they want to crack on and get it done, which is something I hear sometimes from clients. I just want to get it done. But when you try to explain to them, actually, if you fully want to de-risk a project from many aspects of a construction, services, engineering, you need to give your design team the time to make your investigation, do your surveys, get your record information, allow them that time, as we discussed up front, early on, so that you can de-risk it and actually know what you're dealing with. A lot of the time, you're having to design and undertake surveys at the same time, which cost everyone more money, because you're making assumptions and then you're having to revisit them at a later stage because actually the surveys only came in a few months afterwards. So that costs the engineers, the design team, and the client more money, just through having to redo things again. And I know it's in an ideal situation, you would do all your surveys and then begin your design stage. But very often, I would say it tends to run at the same time, which isn't ideal.
Right. Thank you. And we've only got about a minute left, but Will, you've mentioned acknowledge uncertainty, and Claire, you've also, I think, something similar about also acceptance in the client that there'll be unforeseen issues. Maybe Will first, and then Claire. Do you want to just expand on that?
Yeah, I think we just often get asked on projects, okay, tell us all the things that need to happen so that we can be completely certain on this, and we need to get rid of all the uncertainty kind of immediately and de-risk, which is, a good ambition, but I think often there's a lack of acknowledgement that there will be some risk still there, And kind of I'm often trying to get kind of an understanding that I can give you at this stage a range of this much, and then maybe we'll do a survey and we can bring that range down. But unless we went and kind of did all of the project, we won't get to find out some of these things. So I think sometimes there's a lack of acknowledgement that uncertainty will remain, and the extent of that uncertainty, which you do as much to minimize, but you cannot get rid of it completely at the start, right at day one.
Interesting. And Claire, is that the same as your point, or is anything different you were?
Yeah, no, I think that's the same really. It's just having that sort of proactive attitude within the design and client team as a whole to actually get things resolved rather than just to sort of blame everybody.
Interesting. Great, thanks. And I see another couple of questions or comments, and I know, John, you put about factors of safety, and I know that's something we've talked about, and also procurement systems that enable collaboration. Maybe a quick
the
comment.
Procurement one's a big one because it relates back to people tend to chop things up into smaller. We're seeing it at the moment where we get given an enabling works package on a job, but then actually you could start making decisions if you were going to be, do a greater extent to the work, but do you take that risk because you're not going to benefit from it?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you. And our time is just about up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand back to Cliff, who's got a few seconds to summarize expertly everything we've discussed. So Cliff, here you go. Over to you.
Oh, amazing, Nick. Thank you very much for that introduction. What have I been thinking? I mean, obviously I've been involved in the process, and it does make you think. In summary, I'm picking up a lot of, obviously, the discussion about surveys. I like that comment about BIM. We have the digital technology these days to do a lot more with the surveys that we get, and this opportunity, giving clients the advice they need to take the opportunity early. And from a GIRI perspective, in avoiding error, I think our role in this is to help clients to understand that in the process of repurposing, they've got to approach the building design and planning in a different way to a new build. And that's certainly the takeaway for me from this forum. We did have the quick mention. I live near Gloucester, and our Debenhams has just closed, and I can see them having that. I think they're going for student accommodation, but you've got a big floor plate department store that's suddenly going to have a load of rooms in it that have all got to have a sink and a toilet, and all the services coming down. And will the services in the ground being capable of taking that, or will we have to dig up all the high streets to put new drains in? This whole thing is going to impact on everybody, I think. So learning the lessons quickly about how to do it well and avoid error, I think, is massively important. So thanks very much, Nick, and thanks everybody for your input. Really, really great input again, as usual, on these forums. And I think we'll leave it there, and hopefully you'll be able to make our next one, which I think is diversity. Is it, Nick?
It is, yeah, a really interesting topic, diversity.
Yeah. Diversity of thought as well as people, and it's going to be great. So come along.
There's a lot in it. Yeah.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.